Hey everyone, I'm David Colman, and here's a sneak peek at my new course, Design Stylization. So let's put this idea of design versatility into an actual real world practice and scenario. Um, Here, I'm going to share some work with you. Here's work I did for a film called Medusa. It was a project, got canned. It's not a problem naming it at this point. It's shelved permanently. When designing a Minotaur, the first Minotaur design I did was a little bit more realistic. Um, it has a little bit more of an illustrative feel, but it still has a nice sense of uh, design choices and vocabulary. There are specific shape choices, but there you can really feel the mass of that creature and that design and the weight of the character, especially in that fishtail braid going down the back of his head, which was took a bit of studying to actually really even figure that out. Hats off to you ladies for doing this. But it was something that's kind of made a really cool element. And, I still really pushing the shapes. Look how I'm really pushing the shape of the axe and, um, and even like the shape of the horns coming out of the skull as I'm pushing actually the big massive upper body into a little bit of a smaller head. And then this was maybe a little bit too realistic for the director, right? So it's like, we'll take another crack at it. So um, I went ahead and came up with this. So it's a little bit more stylized in terms of the shape proportions. There's still a sense of realism in the anatomical structure. You can still see it there, but it's trapped in a little bit more of a even a simpler silhouette. This one still has a nice silhouette because no matter when you're dealing with real world design, something that might be done for like a Marvel movie, it is still really playing to the idea of a nice silhouette. It just might have a little bit more nuances to breaking the planes to show the realistic elements and function of drapery and costumes and so on and so forth. But they're still overall a nice, pleasing silhouette, just rendered in a little bit more of a realistic fashion. So something like this, and you can even see where I took a specific shape vocabulary for the horns. And the ridges that I had on there, even kind of the delicate nature of, I guess, like the fur of his pants, which it was kind of doing it like, well, it's kind of like his body. It's part of his body. And by putting the belt on, it feels more like pants, but it's really actually really much part of his innate physical characteristics because it's a human and bull together, a steer making this minotaur, this mythological creature, and there's still a lot of character in that face. Obviously, we're talking about design, and character design is really about designing who they are, not just what they are. But you can see how much simpler the shapes are in the face, right? So then maybe the director says, you know what? Or a new director comes in and throws out that other one, or producer, which just happens a lot, where you pitch, you do a show and tell, and you show to the studio creatives, and they're like, "This is great, but I'm not really feeling the look of it. This is one way you can go, but let's really push it. It's not really fitting with the house style, we should say, or we haven't found something that's very unique. So then they might kick it back to me. Like maybe there's a new co-director came on. Maybe they kicked that director out the door, brought someone else in. But let's just say, in essence, that let's not lose that director's job just yet. Let's just say the creators are like, hey, let's really go out there. Let's really throw something out way out into left field. And that's a good way to approach design anyway, especially when exploring styles, is to try something that's so far-fetched, it's easier than to reel it back as opposed to just taking baby steps, right? So consider that when you're actually exploring design styles. So, but let's say that now you've got to jump and do a whole new style pass, right? And this is where the design versatility you have in your shape vocabulary is really important. People are always wondering like how to get where to find their style, and that really comes with something you gravitate towards. But when it comes down to a job, it really helps being a chameleon, right? Being able to change on stop of a dime and really completely switch gears, and to show that you can also do something that's a little bit stylized or something that's hyper realistic. It will increase your job security. or strengthen your job security, right? And increase and broaden your marketability as a designer. So maybe they're like, well, we love and this is where we look back to some of the older designers. Maybe it's a matter of we really love the work of Erte. We love the work that was done for all those like really fashion illustrations and the beautiful stylized design details. We'd like you to really implement something like that, something along the lines of Erte's work. Um, and they're like, well, do you really like the shapes now? We're like, yeah, we like the shapes, but it's really more about the essence of the design motifs. And you can see how someone like Erte has inspired the contemporary greats of like Nico Marley in a lot of his work. So you can see where a lot of contemporary designers are even reaching further back. So you should really try to find design inspiration and stylization for some of the classical greats in terms of what people are doing today. What people are doing today, they just really were inspired by great illustrators and designers in the past. Beautiful contrast, right? Simple shape design, and look how like really nice, and even just the design of the drapery, right? And then they're like, well, we also like the work of the proportions of T.S. Sullivan. Okay, so and we can all see the obvious parallel to the great Chris Sanders' work in this, and see where he was inspired by. Kind of those bigger head proportions and very character driven. And what's nice that these are still illustrative, but have a good sense of design. Look how simple the silhouettes are. So this might be something that your director, you've talked with your director over. This is why it's good sometimes to go with these ideas, pitch some of these ideas back before you start on it. Get on the same page. Then you're kind of you're both on the same page and you're headed down on the same street side by side as you're exploring this pushed style that the studio has asked for together, and you are more in sync with one another because creating a film and the look of picture is a collaborative process. We're not designing in a vacuum, and no one person is smarter than everyone. I'll say that again. No one person is smarter or more creative than everyone. It's never really the product of one person's vision as it is done by committee. So be open to working with other people. And especially something like this, being open to trying to find other design styles. It'll help break you out of your own monotony, right? So these are some things that we're thinking about, of their work. The two classical, old world illustrators and designers that might really inspire, what this new stylized pass is on this Minotaur, right? And let's just take into consideration that we've also done all our research already. We've already studied at this point. We've studied a lot of bulls and steers. So now we can really get into it. So thinking about those bigger proportions, right? And there was a real push of those the bigger heads and smaller bodies, but he's still the same character. We don't want to lose the integrity of the character and the personality of that character. Just because we're changing style, it still should be the same guy, girl, or thing. So I kind of want to still get that kind of grumpy attitude, right? And just being very look how loose I am in when trying to find those shapes, right? Still keeping a lot of the rounds and bigger shapes. I tend to stay very round at first. Then you go back and start to hammer out some of the harder edges. But if we're looking at T.S. Sullivan's work and we're looking at Erte's work, there are a lot more longer, beautiful curves. In Erte's work specifically, and in T.S. Sullivan's a lot more rounds in there. So I'm going to kind of stick with those shape vocabulary. And you're finding something new. I try to think about what's the dominant shape. Well, I have the overall dominant shape of the head, right? And do we want to make the and you could also do them this way, right? Like that. That just me starts to look like a bull. It's kind of generic in my opinion, but maybe they wanted to do that. I like the idea of kind of trying to curve them forward because even in the stylized past, I'm still thinking about the three dimensionality of the shapes. Got the kind of this big egg shape, you know, and you kind of going back and forth to your inspiration, right? So you go back to Sullivan's work, right? As you're trying to find the style for this, right? See those bigger heads. And obviously, it's a little more realistic, but I'm looking at it for the proportion element. So you're going to create something new. You're not copying per se. You're creating something new. But there is definitely a favoring of the bigger head shapes to bodies proportions. And that's something that, the director and the creative execs maybe were leaning towards. Creative execs probably giving you a little bit more of a longer leash, but what you've come together in agreement with your director or art director or production designer could very was very well a little bit more on that same page maybe of where we're going with Sullivan's work. And then looking back at Arte's work, those beautiful curves you can see, I'm kind of thinking about those in my design choices here. And it's not going to be exact, but I will really bring in Arte's work when it comes to the details, stylizing those details. Let's get to it. And making sure that I'm still getting something completely new from what I had from the previous design pass. Still thinking about kind of making those ungulate type feet of like a quadruped and not giving him just flat feet. Still trying to maintain that integrity of the source material, but a little bit more stylized. There's a lot of character there. You really feel still who he is, even in this new design pass. He's got like a huge belt, right? Kind of that big ridge on his back. And I just picked this same pose because it really exudes that grumpiness, that and he's a big grumpy pants, he's almost like a big baby, but he's tough at the same time. Still someone I wouldn't want to mess with. And in this pass, I'm trying to even push the character a little bit more. Like maybe he is a little overweight. He's big and buff, but maybe like there's a belly in there that he's resting his arms on. So always try to add something more in the style iterations, not just a newer shape vocabulary and a newer look of picture when you're in the middle of your world building. But maybe try to add a few different character elements that kind of really, come to the surface on their own. I do believe that design reveals itself. That as you're working through your explorations and trying different design styles, as you're finding your own style, the character will really kind of reveal itself, and that's when you find something that's very appealing and gravitating. So you can see I'm kind of keeping the shapes very graphic, as we kind of discovered in Erte's work. You're going to get more of that graphic sensibility there as you get more of the proportion inspiration from T.S. Sullivan's work. Could even make his head a little bigger. Keep his ears small. He's got these big gauntlets, right? Now, does he have hoofs, for hands? I think since he's going to be bipedal creature, he's going to have to do a lot more. So maybe he's got either three fingers. I think we're actually going to keep it with maybe try the hose because I haven't tried that before. I've been trying it with, just digits. And maybe we can get away with something a little different. Can still emote. And what we do in design a lot is when the character has to hold things, we just kind of make this kind of magical third digit. It's got kind of the gauntlet, bracelets, and this is where we kind of bring into the idea of Arte's work, right? We've got these rivets over it. Still thinking about weight and volumes and all of that, right? And as it wraps around the other side, we'll go like this as the belt maybe comes in front here, right? But we could even push the ridge of the back even more, but I think if what happens is then the balance kind of comes off a little bit. And even in a simple pose, there's still a lot of character in it. So, and if you look like he's made up a series of shapes, but it's one cohesive shape, right? The proportions are pretty nice too. You've got the upper of this whole upper bodies is one. I made this as kind of one shape, right? And then you've got his lower half here. And then if you break that up, you've got the bigger shape here in the middle, and the medium, and on the head. Because I think if I went so big on the head, it would look like he would fall over. If I went real T.S. Sullivan like this, right? Probably a little bit more like this. It just gets a little bit too pushed. I feel like he's actually going to fall over, but we can try it. It's always good to try in this phase, right? Let's even see. There we go. It's actually not that bad. Now we made that more of the dominant shape, right? So it's pushed even more. Can pull out a little bit. This is where it was. Felt the look could be. Yep. I think there was something in there. I think there's something to that. I actually like what this is here. I even surprised myself. It happens. And I could go ahead and make the dominant shape like these big horns, right? I could push those a little bit more. And I probably should, just a tad, but I'm still thinking about how looking at my original source material, where they're coming out on the bull's skull, right? Constantly jumping around, just like when doing a painting. Because if you get too caught up in one area and start micromanaging, but like almost micro designing, and all of a sudden you pull out, you spend all this time on like the little details, and you realize it's not really working. So really be a little bit more open and loose in this early phase, and before you lock anything in. Look at that beautiful line right there. That's very Erte, right? Let's pull back that stuff. Let's look at it one more time. Especially this one. Look at that nice big S curve, right? You can see where it kind of came from, right? Now we've seen beautiful S curves in like Milt Kahl's work, but I think he probably looked back at Erte's work at some point as well. Inspired a lot of designers. We're inspired by things of the past to make up something new. I actually feel this is even more successful and it gets a little bit closer to those Sullivan proportions. I think this would be something if I went to my director like this, like, ah, it's still him. It's still Leon. That's what his name was. But it's something brand new. We're just gonna name him Leon or Leo or Richard. Hi, Richard. I think you're gonna have to kind of go and pull that. There we go. I also feel the pose got pushed in where it's really crunched together. It's almost like it's closed off, right? I'm starting to think about the hairs on his hooves, right? Um, because I think I'm thinking about what I'm even not seeing. Like I think you should have these huge arms and almost like maybe these tinier hands. And as I think about those hooves, where the fur is, and stylize that. This once again is very Erte. As I start to get into that there, and I'm looking, having to look at, it, I'm like, okay, just making sure that it's still working as a design, right? Volumes are still there, amidst kind of this more of a graphic style. Still has a lot of volume. Sometimes what happens, people start stylizing with graphic shapes. It's great, but then you have to really visualize and how's it going to be manifested into 3D, as most things are in 3D at this day. And so you're not going to be able to do a lot of cheats. So you need to visualize it in dimensional forms, right? You think about, well, that in this graphic shape, it's a circle, but in reality, it's a sphere, when it's going to be realized in 3D. So constantly think about that, even when trapped in a graphic shape like this. And like, do I do his pants really low like this? I think that's kind of funny, but I started to think about that big belt, right? Always thinking about the idea of good design. And what's the bigger shape? And what's the dominant shape? So they're not competing with one another. You don't want them to cannibalize one another. So I'll bring the belt up a little bit. And then like, what type of belt is it? Right? Leather. This is something I might keep the shape a little bit more free, right? Space is good. Look at Erte's work, like the image up on our screen now. Look, you've got a lot of nice design motifs on her shoulder and like almost tattooing and jewelry. It's a little more jewelry, I believe. And then there's on her torso, breast area, legs, and hips, or the start of the top of the hips, like the iliac crest and the abdomen is free. It's open. So you got to have a nice variation both. It's an asymmetry of negative and positive spacing. And as we're kind of getting into his, I'm starting to think about like those fur like chaps, almost like they're chaps, but they're part of his body. Thinking about those. It was so great is there's a lot of weight on this character, even in the cartoony graphic sensibility. Putting his ankle up still, right? Taking the idea he's still a quadruped on two legs. Think about what's going on underneath those knees. Still trapped in a shape, but as I kind of start to break it up, give some kind of realistic texture to it. Thinking about even in its graphic stylized sensibility, this is like his big, the big shoulder back there, and his big back muscles, as we see kind of in these other designs that I've had a little bit more unrealistic, and even in the cartoony past, it's still there. I'm still thinking about it. I really like the expression on his face, so I'm kind of leaving that till the end. It's like, where do you draw the line of what wraps over what area, right? This is kind of grabbing in here, kind of going up in there. How much of that gauntlet would you see from over here? That feels about right. And this is what sometimes I'll do is I'll go ahead and flip it. I see it. I'm like, it feels like a little long. I'll pull it up a little bit more here. Do you do that where he's resting on his? And that feels a little more. That feels like he's closed off, right? So you don't want to do that. And a nice compromise. That feels good. The arm kind of tucks up underneath there, thinking about how long that arm is, right? Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. So no matter what angle you're dealing with, still think about the dynamics of appendages and different parts of the body or different parts of the form or tree branches or the other side of a wall, even though you're not seeing it if you're doing a bit of world building on with architectural elements. Flip this again. So you don't want to remember, we want to micromanage it in one area and get too caught up in the details. But if you look at, I'm thinking about how he's covering the edges of the belt buckle, so that works for me. As the fat kind of goes over the side, his big arms, that kind of comes out in front, right? Because also as volumes, the volume is still there, but as things start to get further away with you, the idea of almost atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective is usually with tonal work, but it's also the idea of shapes and volumes and less details. And as it goes away from you, the volumes will start to compress from that angle. But if your camera comes around the other way, you'll see how that volume is still the same as it should be when it's closer to the camera, right? Yeah, I think that works. What would happen probably in the 3D element is you get a little bit more of these rounds like that, right? But I really like kind of the weight of that straight. That is a creative liberty that I'm taking where you feel the weight as it's hitting something. You always let that ground win and that other element it's interacting with. So as that comes to pass, you show a lot more straights in certain areas. Still breaking the form, even with these details. But very stylized as opposed to if I was something more realistic, maybe get a little bit more of that layering as you've seen on some of the previous iterations of this character, previous style passes. Really feel that volume go around even more. There we go. Feels right. And look how rough and loose still it is, right? And now as we get into how we're going to handle like kind of the fur or detail element of those like chaps, right? Or like his furry legs. Probably do a lot bigger, like more of like a matted fur feel, you know? And look how it's becoming bigger as it's coming around towards you, right? But you can feel the thickness there. And to continue that element of the way his fur is handled, a little bit of a furry butt sticking out. And look at how also, using good design, I'm not being too symmetrical in the way I'm handling those fur chaps area. It's kind of really almost like a scallop shape. And then it's not broader than the belt, right? So look how I'm breaking down all the details. It's very airtight. You can see, as you refer back to that work, just look at, the patterning, very much in the patterning. This is a good rough first pass of a new style. And you got to realize that the first crack at it may not be the end all be all. No one's born a genius. No such thing really as a prodigy. So you'll come back to it over and over again. But let's say maybe also on the skull there on the steer, if you look back to the original work of our source material, there's a lot of fur up there. So I think this would be kind of a cool thing. Like maybe he's got this mohawk. And it breaks up that nice S curve in the back, so it doesn't look too flat. The S curve of the horn as it goes down along the back there. It looks like a punk rock look to it, which is not a bad thing. It's just a grunty punk rocker, which makes me think that you have to put a bull horn in his nose, right? Even the way I'm handling the wrinkles and stuff as the way on the previous path, you can see the way the mouth here, very different. Just a good design choice is to think about dark over light, light over dark, your highest point of contrast, So adding that big black under his eye. He definitely feels like a punk rocker with that. Or some sort of rocker. He's got some cute freckles. And if you notice on the end of a steer, that's kind of sometimes darkened at the top. And as we saw with Erte's work, how there's this one image, like see how it's handled on the dress there? It might be kind of cool too. But you don't want it to overpower. So as I'm doing this, I'm going, feels like it's getting a little too much. It almost looks like blood on there. So maybe we just kind of do a bold detail. Maybe we just break it up at the bottom. Still feels like blood, especially. So let's just kind of pull it back a bit. Just fade it out. It's getting a little bit more graphic. Make sure the volumes are there, right? As I kind of look at what that S curve created, I was like, oh, but it kind of ruined the volume a little bit. So I want to make it more of a solid, cohesive design. So I would bring that up a little bit. And it still kind of follows the line, the eye line still follows the back, around that back. You really want to lead the eye around the design. Composition is not reserved for just picture making or frame design in film or big landscape illustrations. It really is also in single characters. So take that in consideration that you really want to engage your viewer and lead them around the page the same way you would in a bigger picture making scenario. I feel like it was in a really good place, you know. Still very loose, right? We incorporated the Sullivan, T.S. Sullivan proportions. We incorporated the Erte design motif and stylization of patterns, right? And it's still the same character that is written up in our script. You still feel that same personality. I don't want to clean up too much because I really want to make sure that it's kind of maintains um, that spontaneity and energy, you know, that I like to bring into my design work. And you could feel that, you know, that where the horn is, it might be a little low, based on, you know, where it might sit on the head. But once again, we're creating this is a a fantastical creature, and when it's such a different stylized shape vocabulary like this, you can take a lot more creative freedom and really push ideas and not be so worried much about the logic police. So it's like if I move it way up there, it starts to become something a little different. Something somewhere in between. Like, I'm still always thinking about the skull, even in its stylized shape vocabulary state. And the wrinkles that might rest around it, right? So even if it's black and white state right there, in a rough design, it still works quite nicely, right? Really fun. So you can see the advantages of being competent in design style variation and versatility and having a wide array of shape vocabulary will make you an either stronger designer and be able to contribute on projects of all different styles and levels and different disciplines when you have these amount of skills in your tool belt, you know? So design stylation is a very big, important part of becoming a very competent designer, whether it's world building, creature, character, or concept design.